This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
Today on CityCast Boise, a proposal in Congress could force the sale of millions of acres of Idaho's public lands, including some of our most iconic peaks, trails, and wild spaces. It's being framed as a budget fix, but the real cost could be the outdoor legacy our children would never experience. Is there still time to stop this? It's Tuesday, June 24th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. I'm talking with Brian Clark, opinion writer for the Idaho Statesman. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Brian.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
You just wrote a startling piece about the public lands Idaho might lose if Senate Republicans have their way. Can you quickly break down what their proposal is?
So the proposal, it's been placed into what's called a reconciliation bill, which functions as a budget with the way Congress works now. The special thing about it is that it's allowed to bypass the filibuster in the Senate, so it can pass with just 50 votes, plus the vice president breaking the tie. The overall reconciliation bill covers a lot of things, but Senator Mike Lee of Utah inserted a provision that would force the disposal of a whole lot of public land around the West, probably on the order of 3 million acres, and the Wilderness Society got together and sort of mapped out where the areas of eligible land are, and it's pretty shocking if you look around Idaho.
Yeah, I want to talk about what's on the line. What specific places in Idaho could we lose access to if this bill passes?
So if you look at a map of Idaho's BLM and U.S. Forest Service land, it's almost all potentially on the table if it's not a national monument, a national historic place. A couple of the things that stood out to me are so Idaho has a group of 9 very big mountains that are over 12,000 feet tall, and a lot of people try and over their lifetime climb all of those. When I originally wrote, it looked like 6 of those, either the access or the summits, could be on the table. The language in the bill has changed a little bit. Now it's all of them. Basically, the entire Lost River Range, huge portions of the Pioneer Range, the Boulder Mountains, the Centennial Range, huge areas near McCall, parts of the Boise Foothills, huge sections of land near Sun Valley and Stanley around the Sawtooth. There's basically anywhere you look, there's land that is eligible for sale if this passes.
Yeah, I checked out the Wilderness Society's map, and I was actually shocked to see that the Boise Foothills were on there. What else might surprise people?
So there are very large sections of the Boise Foothills that are on BLM land, and because these don't have special protected status, huge sections that could be sold off. And if the Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, takes the supposed reasoning for these public land sales seriously, they might be some of the higher end items, because the supposed justification is affordable housing. Well, you can't put affordable housing out in the middle of the wilderness somewhere too easily. So one really good place to put it would be near the city, and the closest BLM land to Idaho's biggest cities are huge portions of the foothills.
Is that even feasible? I mean, there are some houses on the foothills, but there have been also major issues with builders trying to build on the foothills and parts of it sinking, foundations cracking, whole housing projects just having to be abandoned. Is that even potentially an option that people would have?
So it's important to separate 2 questions. Would it be feasible from a construction standpoint? I'm not an engineer, so I can't give a very good answer to that. But an important thing to understand about how these lands are designated is if in the case of BLM lands, it's at the discretion of the Secretary of the Interior. For the U.S. Forest Service, it's at the discretion of the Secretary of Agriculture. it sort of gives them direction that what you're supposed to be doing is providing affordable housing. But, think about, it's kind of an odd analogy, but Trump's threats to invoke the Insurrection Act. There's actually a link here. In order to do that, he has to create a finding that there's been an invasion. And the courts, as they've pushed more towards adopting what's called the unitary executive theory, have basically said, yeah, whether we're under invasion, that might just be a decision the president gets to make. He gets just to call that, and the courts might not get to question it. And there's a similar justification here. The Secretary of the Interior has to say, oh, this is for affordable land. Does it have to be factually good land to build affordable housing? Maybe not. So it's very unclear whether this would achieve its actual aims. And there are a whole lot of reasons we can go into later why I don't think it would in Idaho.
And you mentioned that there were spots near McCall, recreational spots in popular places like the Tetons that would also be impacted. What happens if that land gets sold? Are we just going to wake up and find no trespassing signs where we used to camp and fish and hike?
That seems to be how it would act. There's almost no opportunity for public input under this proposed bill, at least the latest revisions that have been released. It's changing by the day, but there's very little chance for people to go and protest, to try and stop the sale of a particular piece of land. The way the bill works, the Secretary, either of the Interior or Agriculture, designates a piece of land for sale, and it goes to the auction. There's not even any notice required. So yeah, you could show up to go. One of my favorite hikes almost every year is a place out here. I live in Idaho Falls, for folks who don't know. But over on the Idaho side of the Tetons, there's a really cool one called Darby Wind Cave. You can hike out to this cave. The entrance is probably over 100 feet high. It's about 30 feet wide. Don't try this. People almost die every year. But you can start at another cave, wind your way a couple of miles, I think, through the mountain and pop out of Darby Wind Cave. So it's this beautiful area. And all of the Darby Canyon access is one of those areas that would be potentially for sale. And it would generate probably a lot of revenue for the federal government selling that land. So it might be attractive for them.
Need a reset or just a chance to slow down? Trade the traffic and to-do lists for a glass of wine and an open sky at Walla Walla. Just a scenic 4-hour drive from Boise, this peaceful destination in the heart of the Pacific Northwest offers a true escape from your hectic schedule. You'll have the opportunity to wander through more than 130 wineries nestled among golden hills and vineyards, and then cozy up in a tasting room. You can stroll through the charming historic downtown by day, and at night, dine al fresco on meals made by celebrated chefs from fresh ingredients grown just down the road on local farms. Come discover why Walla Walla is one of the Pacific Northwest's best-kept secrets. You don't have to go far to feel far away. Plan your getaway at wallawalla.org today.
I'm Cindy Lauper. My psoriasis was all over, even on my scalp, which may mean 4 times the risk for psoriatic arthritis. But Cosentyx works on both.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at Cosentyx.com or 1-844-COSENTYX. Ask your doctor about Cosentyx.
This seems to be an issue that Idahoans across political spectrums, across really every spectrum, it's not even just political, are very concerned about this. I mean, I had my brother contact me. He also lives in Eastern Idaho, and all of his favorite camping spots are actually on this Wilderness Society map that could be up for sale. Have you gotten the sense that overall Idahoans are very disturbed or upset by this, or does this seem to be a select group of more outdoors people? What kind of a vibe are you getting on this?
There seems to be huge backlash from basically all corners. I've seen almost nobody speaking out in support of it. A big part of being in Idaho is that you interact with federal lands. People do it different ways. There are people who are motorized users, people who like trail riding on horses, people who like hiking, rock climbing, all different kinds of things. And also, I shouldn't leave out grazing. Grazing is a major use of these federal lands as well, and it's also at threat. And so you really don't find many significant corners of people who are in support of it. And there's actually a fairly good history of polling on this issue too. The College of Colorado has done surveys for many years. And actually the main question they asked was it was sort of narrower. It's about transferring from federal control to state control public lands. And there's not a majority in any Western state that has ever supported that. There's always a majority opposition, usually over 2/3.
We talked about how one of the reasons that they're saying that this would be a good option for people is potentially for more housing or cheaper housing. But is that the only thing that this land could be used for? I mean, could somebody buy this land and start mining on it? Could they potentially contaminate water nearby? Could the land be stripped and wasted? What could happen if this land gets sold off and disposed of?
Well, so there aren't any provisions in the bill to dictate this will happen. Things X, Y, and Z will happen on this piece of land we just sold. Once it's sold, it's private property. People can do whatever the law allows them to do. So if you're allowed to create a mine in that area, you can create a mine. And it should be worth saying you can also a lot of mines in the West are on federal land, and it remains federal land. They're subject to claims and leases and things like that. But yeah, it could be trophy homes, it could be mines, they could be clear cut. It really depends on what the buyer wants to do with it. Once it's out of the federal government's hands, it has much less say over, and the state also has almost no say over what people can do with it.
Are there any protections in the bill for special places like national forests or designated wilderness areas, or are those all at risk too?
So national forests, as such, there's no protection. About 2/5 of the land that's at risk in Idaho is national forest land. There are certain specially protected pieces of land that are removed from it. So, for example, Craters of the Moon is one of the few areas that is not wouldn't probably be eligible for sale. But that's kind of a double-edged sword also, because there are certain parts of Forest Service and BLM land that are exempt. These are things like national monuments. But every time you take one of those pieces of land off the table, that means you have to take more from what remains. Because what the bill says you have to do is you have to sell between 0.75% and 0.5% of BLM and national forest land. So every time you remove some of that land from the overall denominator, what remains you got to take more of.
Oh, so as we're trying to protect certain parts of our public lands, we're just dooming other parts of our public lands.
Under the language of the bill, yes.
You mentioned this isn't popular. Nobody's really coming out and saying, I want to sell our public lands. I hate hiking and the outdoors and open spaces and, all these things that make Idaho. So where do our senators, Mike Crapo and Jim Risch, stand on this bill? Have they said anything?
So when I originally wrote, they had not made any public statements about it. Since then, they've come out in opposition to public land sales to private entities. It is worth taking that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because we don't yet know exactly the process that this bill will go through. And a question they might have to ask themselves is, am I willing to vote against the overall big, beautiful bill in order to oppose the public land sale? That might have a different outcome for them. They might not be willing to do that. So it's not a time to go to sleep just because Risch and Crapo have both said they're against this. They also have been very careful to say transfer to private parties. It leaves open a rhetorical crack, which is like, oh, what about transfer to the state government? And as I and many other people have written for a long time, what transfer to the state government means is it gets sold to private parties because the state of Idaho does not have enough money to manage to fight forest fires, all of these things on federal land if it's transferred to it. If it's transferred to the state, it probably gets sold into the private sector, and that's what's happened with a huge portion of Idaho's endowment lands. The public lands that it was deeded at the time of statehood, huge sections of those have been sold.
So it sounds like potentially Risch and Crapo are trying to straddle the line of say what they think Idahoans want to hear or what will be popular, while also maybe weaselly leaving the door open for the sale of public lands. And it seems like they really haven't indicated they will absolutely be voting against this.
I'd say they've left themselves room for many options, and that's not an uncommon thing to see from politicians. But it's a good reason for people who are concerned about sale of public lands not to say, "Oh, Risch and Crapo have come out against it, so have the senators in Montana. Therefore, there aren't enough votes for this bill." That may or may not be true. We don't know.
Well, speaking of Montana, Senator Daines got protection for Montana lands. Why aren't Crapo and Risch doing the same for us?
That's a good question. It seems quite clear. The entire state of Montana is exempted. When you look at the public lands map, it's one of the ones you would obviously include. It has tons of federal land as well. But Daines came out very early and said no public land in Montana, and as a result, there is no public land sale in Montana in this bill. That's something Risch and Crapo could potentially insist on in exchange for voting for it, but we haven't seen any evidence that they've done that yet because our state hasn't been removed.
Representative Mike Simpson of Idaho has come out pretty strongly against the sale of public lands. Does that potentially carry any weight that might protect our public lands?
It does. Simpson's opposition to it helped get it taken out of the big beautiful bill when it was on the House side, and it does carry a lot of weight. It's a very important and a great thing that he did. It's part of a long legacy of conservation that he's built for himself, including the designation of the Boulder White Clouds. So yeah, it would be quite helpful if we could get a similar level of line in the sand drawn by Senators Risch and Crapo.
Does that seem like something that the public could do? Is there room for that? Are they listening? Does it seem like they're listening? Is this something we could call them, inundate them, and it will change? Or does it seem like they've kind of taken a weaker stance and that will be the end of it?
So initially, when I first wrote, they had said nothing about this, and you could see in multiple stories, reporters had called and their questions weren't answered. They were refused comment or just never called back. After some pretty dedicated public backlash to this, that not just due to my article, but a lot of people have written about this, they've clarified and said, okay, we oppose that. I think that does show that they do care what people think about it. They care what kind of calls they're getting, especially respectful, specific phone calls, not calling them and yelling. And they've moved to taking a public stance against it, which at least to some degree puts them at odds with the Trump administration, which is that's a big consequence potentially for them. So I think they are susceptible to public pressure. They're elected officials, and I think if people continue to bring that pressure, it probably continues to yield some results.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car right in your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Governor Little has pointed to public land sales near Las Vegas, where BLM land was sold to the county to build affordable housing as a success story when it comes to the sale of public lands. Is that an example, anything like what's being proposed here, or is that just a political cover for Governor Little for something that could be much more damaging?
Yeah, so there is this precedent of the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act, as it's called, which was passed, I believe, in the late 90s, and it allows specifically areas of public land that are right around the city of Las Vegas and the surrounding county to be sold, and then that revenue is taken. Most of it stays in Nevada, and it's used for conservation projects, among other things. There are important reasons why that was done exactly there, nowhere else, and why it worked there, and it probably wouldn't work other places. If you look at the city of Las Vegas, if you pull it up on Google Earth or any aerial photo, you'll notice that it does not look like any of the cities in Idaho. When you look at Boise or Idaho Falls or Twin Falls or Coeur d'Alene, you'll notice you have an urban core that's surrounded by, on many sides at least, by huge areas of farmland. This is the normal sort of path to development in Idaho. An area starts as a farming community. Over time, there are some stores in the center of the farms. A town sprouts up, it grows. Las Vegas grew because so large because people built a bunch of casinos in the middle of the desert. Its main constraints to growth were, number one, it was totally ringed in with public land, but it's the driest part, basically, of the driest state in the nation. There isn't any water for agriculture, and so there wasn't any reason to settle most of the land until there were casinos. Idaho is not land constrained in most of its cities that way. Boise sort of is, but the Treasure Valley is not. If you look to the west of Meridian, there's tons of farmland that is being converted into subdivisions. That's sort of that normal path of development. That happens in Twin Falls. It happens in Idaho Falls. We aren't really land constrained, and especially not by federal lands in the ways that Las Vegas is. The one place where you could maybe say there's an exception to that are in some very small resort communities like Stanley. And, I could see an argument for we want to convert this 1 acre of federal land near Stanley for employee housing. That might be reasonable. And it should be said, there are sales of federal lands now. There are several thousand acres, tens of thousands of acres of federal land sold basically every year. It's not something that doesn't happen. So there is room for things like this to happen. This bill is fundamentally different because it just says we need to sell a percentage of all the federal land. That's a very different thing than the Southern Nevada Act.
Yeah, it feels a lot more like filling a quota, not matching what is needed by a community or what fits the culture of a community.
Absolutely. Because if you ask the people who lived in Stanley, do you want to convert 100 acres near you? I don't think you'd get any support for that.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, everyone talks about housing in Boise, the lack of housing, the lack of affordable housing, access to housing. The issue is not that we've got all this BLM land that, man, if we could just develop that, if we could just build houses there, this wouldn't be a problem. That's not the issue that we're facing. So it doesn't really sound like opening up all this BLM land is going to be the solution.
No, and there's sort of an internal contradiction too, because the mechanism through which all this land is sold is an auction. The purpose of an auction is to obtain the maximum value for the thing you're selling. that cuts directly against affordable housing. You're selling land, you're trying to sell it for as much as you possibly can, you're trying to make it as expensive as you can, and then you want somebody to build affordable housing on land that's not near the city that was really expensive to buy. That doesn't seem like it's going to work.
The math is not mathing, Brian.
No, it is not.
This has been described by the Statesman editorial board as, quote, the most precarious moment for Idaho's public lands in a century, end quote. What do you want people to understand about the scale of what's happening?
Well, the biggest reason why this is such an acute crisis right now, in some sense, it's what's going on in this bill. I mean, we could lose all kinds of wonderful things that we'll never get back, that we'll never hand down to our children. And that would be a tragedy in and of itself. But the federal government has a substantial amount of debt. It runs a huge deficit that's going to get bigger because of, it seems quite clear that the Trump tax cuts will get extended. There's going to be more military spending. So we're going to have an even larger debt. If politicians start getting the idea that you can pay for things by dipping into this pot of public land, this is going to happen every year. This is the first year. It's not the last year. Every year you'll have them going back to the pot, trying to take more out, and this will become a means of public financing. And sooner or later, we're not going to live in Idaho as we understand it. We'll live in a place more like Ohio, where you just don't have public land. You wanna fish? Good luck getting in the river. People own the whole shore. You want to go hike? Where? Keep looking. Maybe you can drive several hours and find a place to hike, but you can't do it out of your backyard.
It really does feel like we're going to be mortgaging our children and grandchildren's outdoor experiences, which are some of my most treasured growing up in Idaho. It feels like we're going to be mortgaging those for wars and politicians and tax cuts for billionaires. So what can everyday Idahoans do right now if they want to stop this? What are ways that they can show up?
I'd say probably the most the best tactic is to apply continued pressure to our senators. It's important that this is an emotional issue. I get emotional about it, but if you call up their office and scream at their staff, that they're not going to take that well, and it's probably counterproductive. It's a lot better for a lot of people to register, I'm opposed to this, and if you pass it, I'll vote against you in the next election. That's what they care about most. They like staying in office. So these are the kinds of things you can do. Apply continued pressure, call their offices when they show up in Idaho, come and let them know how you feel about public lands, and write letters to the editor, write op-eds, things like that.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for the pieces you've written about this, making sure the public is aware, and then thank you for coming on the show to break it down and explain how this could impact Idaho.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a look at how a recent Supreme Court decision could affect Idahoans' access to health care. Catch you then.